Today I'm going to be talking about boundaries and how it's all about the self, really, that we're doing boundaries for ourselves. A lot of times, boundary talk, um, it's focusing on the other person, and our edges are defined by others' behaviors and what they are willing or not willing to do. And just, I really love what Terry Cole shares about boundaries. So, most of this is written in my own words from her teachings to have boundaries like a boss of your own life. And many of us have heard be a king or queen of your own life. So she says be a boss of your own life. So first of all, compliance does not mean compatibility. Just because someone accommodates us or follows our rules doesn't mean that it's actually a good fit. Another thing she says is regularly going to the things or places that matter to us will give us more internal space. We'll become less reactive and annoyable. So if we don't want to go to certain things, but we, are always saying, no, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that, we end up with like very little internal space for these events. It's like, I can't do it, I don't have the energy, I don't have the space, right? She's kind of saying we have to start living for our own self, and the boundary is not only to be, I don't want to do that, but also like, I want to go to the thing that I like. For example, I want to go do the thing that makes me feel good, like go for a bike ride or go get food from the place that I have nostalgia for, or, do the event, like the class, even though it's a bunch of middle-aged women, and, just whatever kind of judgments may come up, just go do those things. It'll mean that we're less reactive or annoyed in other areas where we have to enforce boundaries. And enforce boundaries is hard. She says how we go along to get along for the greater good of the relationship, because we don't look at it like self-abandonment. We don't want to have conflict. She calls it a disease to please, but it's like the partner doesn't really get to know me. I feel unknown. The other person in the relationship, the boss, the friend, the peer, it's like the bandwidth, the investment should pivot to equity. When I've talked about this with my therapist, she calls it social responsibility is two-way. So a reciprocal relationship means both people matter, both people have to take responsibility. So, in making sure I'm doing the things I like, I won't get upset at you for the things I have to do that I don't want to do, because that situation won't arise, for example. And also like the not, just going along to get along is, instead of the short-term solution, which is like, I want to be liked right now because that's what feels safe for me, it's actually like the biggest boundary blocker cause, which is defensiveness. So if I feel like unsafe, I'm liked right now, there's actually a threat that I'll always be unsafe, because I'll always be unliked if I stop doing what you want, and I never get to do what I want. And so I don't want to get in trouble, but I feel like I'm doing something wrong, I'm making a mistake, I feel defective. For me personally, and she mentions this, as some of the ways if you're a defensive person, and this is because of not feeling safe, but constantly trying to feel safe by getting people to like you, if that's what feels safe, it's a short-term solution. It's not about taking responsibility. Responsibility means responding ability to myself, to my feelings, to my needs, to my boundaries. So if we're not responding to our boundaries, we feel defensive. It's a sign we don't feel safe. So there's a lot of this, I'm not allowed to have nervousness is not how we deal with the nervous system. The main reason I have this YouTube channel is because we are learning how to integrate the self into the nervous system as a collective. It's, it's a role I have to take very seriously. So some of the ways that I notice that I'm always taking it personal in situations, or I have a bias, I make it personal in the areas that really help me. Like I do these prompts every day, and I write out, with the self-inquiry, and I face the stuff, and it's like I start to respect myself more, and I start to know myself better, and it's like this way of feeling less defensive, because I start to see the areas where I could get hurt, and I work with them, and I strengthen myself, and also the vulnerabilities. I start to see the patterns of maybe giving the wrong people the keys or the clues, So in this work, we heal. So this work is about healing. We're in a nervous system. So for example, me being unable to say no, I was trained not to be able to say no, means that it's very hard for me at phases in my life to hear no. And, I wasn't allowed to change my mind. So I didn't know how to effectively communicate. And I also don't necessarily listen to effective communication very well at certain times in my life when I wasn't able to hear others change their mind. And having unmet expectations for validation and credit. I recognize I have some friends like this, where often like the need seems, there's like something hanging, and I'm like, oh, like they're expecting some validation, or I'm supposed to be happy with them or something, like they did something to please me. And I always have to look at it like, how do I want to navigate these boundaries? Because sometimes we're confronted where we're on the other side of it, where somebody has these silent expectations where they're waiting for us to like be happy with them, but they have, there's like, they're giving us too much power. And that's what we do to others sometimes. We give too much power. There's not a power differential, like, and of course, like I said, taking it personally, if we're doing that in the wrong way and we're not actually confronting ourselves, we start to learn about ourselves constantly in every situation, thinking maybe they're out to get me, or maybe they're talking about me. And even for me, at least, over-explaining. When I get anxious, sometimes in the nervous system, I start to talk too much and I over-explain. And instead of just like being with what is. So, how did we become so defensive in relating, our relational sense? And her main idea is that when we're in a home with authoritarians or chaos or addiction, or when there's too high expectations, it doesn't feel safe to be ourselves. So what does that look like? It's called self-sabotage in order to avoid setting boundaries. And so we tell ourselves lies by making excuses for everyone to justify them, to save myself from having to bring anything up, right? So I don't have to practice it. It doesn't grow stronger, to learn how to say no, or to be who I am, and kind of getting my edges lazily kind of through the outside of what people need and want. And when they get upset, I'll do what they want. And that's how I know what to do, my moral compass from the outside, So people pleasing it's better to put their needs first to avoid confrontation, as a belief that even like, I get upset, right? And then I'll say sorry. But actually, in general, that's taking too much responsibility. I can't respond to their need for me to say sorry, for getting upset, right? Like, honor the getting upset first. So that's, and that's like a way, like, if we are able to have our true feelings and let ourselves be known, we're actually letting go of some of these things that are called dishonesty, inauthenticity, manipulating people for love and acceptance, controlling or fixing behavior, acting self-righteous because of our self-sacrificing, like, look how much I do, look how perfect I am, look how much, I sacrifice, I do so much for you, I care so much, why don't they do all this for me? When we notice this pattern, it's like they're not really self-motivated choices. So let's look at that, self-motivated. So who's motivating who, right? Self-motivated to act. If we're not happy with how we're acting because we're not getting what we want, and this is a two-sided coin. When we're being dishonest with ourselves, we're going to have friends who are dishonest, with their self, and people, there's not real intimacy there. And so we might be repeating those places that we learn this defensiveness. For example, there might be very high expectations. No one's ever allowed to say no, or be unhappy, or, be dealing with chaos, or be confused, or, be controlling, or have an addiction problem. Like, everything's in denial, or maybe acting out in the relationship. So self-motivation, so we start with self-awareness. We have to just see it. We have to see, perhaps I'm not being honest with myself. What does that mean? Perhaps there's something deeper here. Perhaps for example, today with my therapist, I learned there's somebody in my life where the reliability is what I needed. And I didn't realize that having this person be reliable to me, physically, a location I could always go to see them, is so important to me. I realized how much commitment matters to me, and reliability. Then it's self-knowledge. It's the basement of consciousness. It's like, now I know that for me, unreliability and lack of commitment has really hurt me in the past and made me feel unsafe, right? I've done a lot of people pleasing in that area, I can tell, because when I move into self-acceptance, I'm not judging it, I'm realizing that, the unreliability to be abandoned, or to be alone, right? So, self-acceptance, seeing like that's so scary to me. It's so scary in a way. I accept my fear of abandonment, right? I accept my fear. And that is a huge step into kind of, this is who I am, right? And then we have self-compassion, forgiving and empathizing with impactors. And then I think back to like how in some of the relationships I was in, I didn't respect boundaries and people weren't reliable for me, or, you know, people couldn't commit to me because I wasn't willing to commit to them. And there were times where I look back even earlier and I see people couldn't commit to me because they were so unsafe in their body, even caretakers. And forgiving the fact that the people around me didn't have boundaries, they didn't feel safe. They didn't know how to find safety. And so, you know, they didn't teach me how to feel safe with being who I am. And they couldn't accept me for who I am. That means that they too were dealing so much with over-explaining and not being able to say no, and manipulations and dishonesty. And, you know, finally then their self-mastery, like, I'm not going to get it from anyone outside of me. I'm not going to get that reliability and commitment from anyone. But I need it so badly, so I have to be able to count on myself, keep my word to myself, right? I have to be able to have self-love and self-celebration. I have to take good care of myself. And at this point, like in the stages of, you know, self-love, like at self-mastery, we started with self-awareness. Like I can see myself, I can see this part of myself, I can see this need in myself. And then, of course, I can start to realize that everything's happening with my consent. We are consenting because of our natural boundaries to the experience we're having to some extent. So the more that we resist it, the less consent there is, but the less we're able to actually say no, because we're doing things with like resentment, with sorry, I lost my slipper. It just disappeared. So, you know, this sense of committing to myself, and I'm someone who, let's say, I like somebody to treat me to a nice creative food that I either love or haven't had before, and maybe that to me would be a way of showing love, committing to like pleasing myself. That's a way. It could be some type of exhibit, or could be some kind of activity like going to the beach. But it's a way of like, I need this, and this is who I am, and I'm not going to get it from anybody. And everyone has to give it to themselves, and everyone's dealing with a shaken up nervous system at times. So we develop compassion for all those around us who maybe don't even have the tools or the ability to be aware of their self, because they're still in the found the slipper, in the throes of feeling defensive, that they haven't caught their breath, and they're just in weeks and weeks of projects and months and years of caretaking for people because they don't want to find themselves in all of the mess. And so enjoying the pregnant pause is at times before we take in something new, just being. There's an awkwardness in the lull, and we could practice this in conversation as a small way, or like, you know, it's also like a boundary violation to avoid the anxiety, the anticipation that comes up when I won't be silent to learn or know the other person. So it's like not allowing the other person to emerge, which was done to us or we did to others. And there's a codependency is a massive bid for control of outcomes versus the mutually empowered way that naturally occurring events happen. They just naturally occur. So pushing for something specific like feedback, you know, company, something, you know, like that is kind of like, it's like, it's not being able to be in the space between when it comes. And what we practice is learning how to be in the between. Another thing Terry Cole talks about is misnaming emotions. For example, hiding is like saying I'm annoyed when I'm furious, Like, I'm just very annoyed right now, but actually I'm furious. Or, being more honest about how I'm affected is like, saying like, oh, I'm passive aggressive, when really, like, to be honest, you're feeling depressed. Like, just saying another emotion that feels less shameful doesn't help the emotion process. Taking away the shame and feeling it, like, that's a healthy boundary. Shirking responsibilities versus taking responsibilities is like, I'm gonna let you go. Like saying, this isn't working, I'm gonna let you deal with what you have to deal with, because either the conversation or the relationship or the situation is not working. And responsibility is being able to respond to what's coming up. So not having these preset rules exactly, but actually listening to what arises, needs and preferences and feelings and thoughts. And another thing that blocks healthy boundaries is misleading people or talking code. This is like dissatisfaction. It's like kind of saying like, I always love like to go to that place, and meanwhile you're in a totally different place and you're not really being direct. Or you say like a story about cuddling, hoping that they're going to touch you. Like, it's just not being direct, and it's like kind of trying to tell people you're tougher than you are, or that you don't feel things the way you do, or that you are further ahead than you are. It's basically not giving people a chance to know us, is having unhealthy boundaries. We think we have to be bigger or smaller, or heavier or lighter, or taller or shorter, kind of, than the real. And finally, this is a big one about saying no. So I went a little deeper here with what she talks about. She says, there's a lot of ways to deal with it, because that's kind of what I said also is something I'm working with. Saying no or changing my mind. Saying no, like as a felt sense, is what a lot of embodiment is about. It's like learning how we always learned with information and computers, it's like 1 or 0, on or off. And then you have like yes or no in the embodiment. Your body says yes, your body says no. So not giving into the pressure, understanding why it's hard based on my impactors and conditioning. Can they do it themselves, or are they actually in need? Another approach, he says, is buy time. Say, I need to think about it. Another is look at my worth and what's being asked. Trying a new way. And finally, their want isn't greater than my want is a good way to also talk about ourselves. And I'm going to talk about some things that I learned about boundaries when I wrote a little bit about, I had a talk with my friends about a couple years ago for sure, and we were doing like a self-learning conversation, and I realized how I felt were some areas where my boundaries had been blocked, and so I just like jotted some notes down. And although it's not current, I still do this work regularly, but I wanted just because I had it with this with this material, so I wanted to share. So one thing I realized at that time was that I finally realized my own boundaries. Started with self-awareness, right? Then it moved into as we move into self-mastery, and which is like a self-love. Before that, we do need to know it, accept it, and feel for it. So knowing it, so we accept that it exists, right? Like, these are some things about myself I had to accept. Then I had to know it, which means I had to get it to be something that I could comprehend, grasp, and kind of understand the ins and outs a little bit. And then kind of in terms of feeling for it, there's there's seeing it, then there's knowing it, and then there's accepting it, which is yielding to it. It's not trying to change it anymore. It's not trying to make it different. It's not even bargaining with our higher power or different aspects of ourselves. And then it's actually feeling for it and feeling for why it arose. Like, why did I have such a hard time with this? And it's because I didn't get it. Maybe I didn't know how. And finally, then I'm going to give it to myself. So these are some things like that. So first of all, I don't want anyone to answer my phone. There was a time where somebody just who used to answer my phone. I have to live with me, not anyone else. So I kept feeling like I have to live with people. I have to be a good living partner for others. Then I put myself in the kid role, then think others are out to get me when they don't take care of me. These are some boundary issues I found. Another was romantic does not equal platonic. I have to choose one, especially because a big one here, I'm looking for non-sexual love, to be loved for who I am without being the pleasure or distraction, maybe more women friends. And another here, and I'm still in that track, even if I'm dating a man at all these different times, I still also want more female friends because of this reason. And then finally, the last one I wrote here was, I refuse to accept an adult intimacy love from a man because I've been too in the wound of an unhealed child and can't have sex. If I can't get love, looking for it in whatever is available. So this was a big boundary, which resulted that I wasn't interested in this being an adult yet, because I was healing some aspect of me at that time. And I always thought I have to always be available. I'm not allowed to take breaks and heal. And, what I took from that, and actually a way to self-love and self-celebrate, was I could look and see, where is the love coming in other areas. It doesn't have to be that I'm staying in a relationship in that way. Maybe there's ways that this person and I can bond, or maybe I can focus more on other relationships. And it was very formative when earlier in my life, a friend of mine who I had dated, my first boyfriend really, his name was Benjamin, or his English name was Kevin, came in from Chicago. And a quote I'll say from him was that he said on friendship that there's no true friendship between men and women. So I was probably looking to experiment with that a bit. I was looking to see if there was a friend I had, if any man was my real friend. And I could say I'm still working on that experiment. And so this is some very interesting material on boundaries, and I hope to have another video after the weekend. Tomorrow is going to be the Sabbath, Saturday, so I will not be putting up a video. Thank you for spending this time with me. Be well.